So, so good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining this exciting 20 minutes live session, which we thought we will start. We are so happy and so delighted that Ajit is our first guest. This is a unique format. This is a new format. We believe it's a simple format, but we love it for your feedback. The idea is to have 20 minutes live session in which esteemed speaker like Ajit will speak for 10 minutes, and then we'll have Q&A for 10 minutes. So it's a crisp 10-minute session, and the idea is in this 20 minutes, you get as much information as is relevant to the topic. The theme is what next, and we couldn't have got anyone better than Ajit Ranade. Ajit is the chief economist of Aditya Birla Group. He's a columnist in Mumbai Mirror. I look forward to his columns every week. He writes in many papers, and he is presented in many seminars and events in nationally and globally. He is sought after. His views are sought after by all policymakers and leading industrialists and industry leaders. So, thought leader, always provocative, always calls a spade, as we all know Ajit. So, I am looking forward to 10 minutes from Ajit on what next. I have requested him to speak about the immediate future of the Indian economy. So, there's some context to it. If you have questions, participants, please do put them in the box. After 10 minutes, I will ask questions to Ajit, and he's here for exactly 20 minutes. So we start going. Thank you again for joining this unique 20-minute live session, starting with what next and what next for the Indian economy with Ajit Ranade. Over to you, Ajit, for 10 minutes of comments and remarks.
Thank you, Ninad, and congratulations on this new initiative. You have promised your participants 20 exciting minutes, but these 20 exciting minutes are in the middle of a pretty grim 12 months, I guess, optimistically. So we are living in very strange and unexpected or unprecedented times. Who would have imagined that the price of oil would go down to minus $37? And who would have imagined that we are in the middle of a global pandemic, but the pandemic is not affecting the usual suspects or the backward countries like African countries or even India, South Asia. The epicenter seems to be in developed countries. So it's a very strange and somewhat difficult to understand situation. But clearly what has happened is it has led to a huge supply shock. So because of the lockdown in various countries and most stringently in India, it has practically shut down the economy, 3/4 of the economy. It has also led to a huge demand shock. So supply shock and a demand shock because there's a steep decline in demand in the sense that not only for services like airlines, hospitality, tourism, travel, and restaurants, but also increasingly for a lot of discretionary items because consumers becoming anxious, apprehensive about their own futures, about their incomes, about their jobs, and so on. And to top it, to top both the supply and demand shock, we also have had a financial shock, which is the destruction of wealth in the stock markets. But of course, that's coming back. I think if you believe that the stock markets are forward-looking indicators, from the bottom that they reached a couple of weeks ago, they're up already 15%. But you know, they can be notoriously fickle and they can change their views. So this is where we are, and clearly the way out of this, it's immediately a health emergency. It's exposed the fact that India spends on a public spending on health and healthcare is very low. It's barely 0.8% of GDP, and it's health being actually primarily a state subject. That is, state governments have to handle it. Public health, and they also spend combined spending for the whole country is not even, I think, less than 2 lakh crores. So that's where we are. So this pandemic has exposed that we need to tremendously upscale healthcare spending, and that's where actually the future, immediate future lies. That if I were to identify sectors, since a lot of your participants are going to be investors as well as entrepreneurs, healthcare, pharma, anything related to healthcare, health insurance will be sectors which will have a solid momentum. But clearly, the way to come out of it is going to be largely depending on government action, including the Reserve Bank of India monetary stimulus. So fiscal and monetary stimulus is the way out of this. There is no doubt about that. We can talk about what other things need to happen, but definitely it has to be led by a fiscal and monetary stimulus. For its part, the Reserve Bank of India, which is going to be a junior partner in this, they can't be leading this, unlike the global financial crisis of 2008-9, which started with the Lehman crash, and it started actually with the mortgage crisis in America, and therefore was largely financial, and therefore monetary stimulus was the leading first step. Here, in the present times, monetary stimulus is at best a supporter to the government. So the Reserve Bank has done a fair bit. They have injected liquidity of nearly 4 lakh crores. They have slashed interest rates. They have announced moratorium on loans, so you don't have to pay any interest on loans for the next 3 months. And they're doing other things. But what we are looking for is actually a massive fiscal stimulus from the government of India. Because you see, it's the sovereign which has practically unlimited power to print money, quote unquote, print money. The reason there is a hesitation to doing a massive fiscal deficit in India, I think the reasons are 4 in my mind. Number 1 is that the government is worried that they will unleash inflation, because printing money can be inflationary. Number 2, they believe that if the government spends a lot of money, which is by borrowing from the financial markets, from banks, and so that may put upward pressure on interest rates. Number 3 is that if there is massive spending, that can also destabilize the currency, and the currency Indian exchange rate may slip or deteriorate, depreciate. And number 4, there is always the worry that India's country rating among international investors may suffer. I think all these 4 risks are currently benign. They are legitimate concerns, but they are benign in the sense that inflation is clearly not a problem, except we have to worry about food inflation, and not because there's inadequate food, but because of the supply chain and logistics problems. So on one hand, we have nearly 80 million tons of rice and wheat in government godowns, and this is even before the arrival of the expected bumper crop of Rabi. But we still have those pictures of long lines of people waiting for food, those migrants, millions of people trying to migrate and literally walking from cities to villages, and inadequate distribution in the PDA. So inflation is not a real, not a real danger at this stage. The interest rates are very low anyway. I don't think there's any danger that interest rates will be crowded out. On the currency slippage also, I don't believe that it's a big concern. If anything, the only reason why we worry about currency and depreciation is because India is a big importer of crude oil. The largest big item of imports is crude oil. And crude oil prices are at unprecedented lows. As I said, they are nearly zero as far as Texas is concerned. So crude oil is not a big danger. And finally, about country rating, I think because India's debt is largely domestic, so a negative, first of all, when most other countries are also struggling, I doubt if the current rating agencies will take action against India. But even if they do, it's not likely to affect government debt, because debt is largely owed and owned by Indians. Very, very little of it is owned by foreigners. So in the near future, I hope the government of India announces a solid fiscal package of at least, let's say, 3 to 4% of GDP, which will be roughly 8 lakh crores. And I would expect that to be in the form of several things. Number 1, to clear all payments to vendors, because in a downturn, in a recession, large corporates, including public sector entities, including government of India, they withhold payments, they delay payments, and the small guys get suffered. I mean, one big example of that is fertilizer subsidy, which is something like 80,000 crores. So clearing all pending payments. Secondly, instant refund of income tax from last year. Thirdly, perhaps floating a special COVID bond, say 2 lakh crores worth of bonds, which will be a long-term 20-year bonds, tax-free status, deep discount bonds, and a variety of other things, including private placement of debt directly between the government of India and the RBI, bypassing the bond markets. So if these things happen, then I have a feeling that we will see the economy coming back. I would say the biggest beneficiary of, in addition to what I just said, of fiscal package is infrastructure. The finance minister just announced a national infrastructure pipeline (NIP) of 105 lakh crores. That is 105 trillion rupees. This was before the pandemic, of course. And largely 80% of that is going to come from government's resources, debt and equity. So that can be embarked upon. This includes not just roadways, highways, and so on, but also things like low-cost housing. India has an official shortage of something like 27 million homes. Now imagine this is an area, by the way, where a lot of innovation can happen. I've seen innovative solutions from people in Pune, Bangalore, where they build low-cost housing using discarded containers. I mean, these are not just these are not temporary housing to be built at project sites of large roadway programs and construction sites, but actual livable low-cost housing. So there's a huge amount of innovation that can happen there. As I said, healthcare is one subject where a lot of innovation can happen. So if indeed the infrastructure program gets going, then I would say the conventional sectors, old economy sectors like construction material, metal, steel, cement, that will get some support. I also believe, as I said, apart from healthcare, and I mentioned healthcare and pharma, even consumer goods, I think, especially staples, should benefit. Although right now they are kind of under bit of a disruption, because I believe almost half of India's FMCG production is currently, unfortunately, from the red zones of COVID. That means, so the lockdown will not be immediately relaxed I expect on 3rd of May. It'll take time. It'll be progressively relaxed. You can't expect. So that is going to affect some element of FMCG restoration. But of course, there are sectors like sectors
like
like
to wind up in 1 minute.
Yeah, sure. So sectors like hospitality and airlines and malls, footfalls in malls, I don't think it can come back so easily. But this is also a great time for a lot of innovation happening in digital space, and because people are this new experience of being in lockdown and working in the digital mode like this, I'm sure is spurring a lot of innovation and new products and services. So
thanks,
over to you,
Ajit. Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you.
So COVID bonds is a great idea. I think, looking at the positive side, innovation, we have a lot of questions. So, your responses will have to be a little brief and cryptic.
Sure.
I'm going to show the first question from Yasmin Javeri. Do you think capital will flow to less affected economies like India when things are simmered down a bit?
Well, the instinctive reaction of in a risk aversion or a recession-like situation is for capital to flow out of emerging markets. That is, instinctively it flows to America, buys treasury bonds, which are supposed to be secure and risk-free. But among the emerging markets, if there's a reversal of sentiment, then India is one of the prime countries to benefit from that sentiment, because even now the IMF is saying that India's forecast growth rate is about +2%, so it's positive for 2020, unlike the Western countries which are in deep negative territory. And India is also likely to be a beneficiary of the risk diversification away from China. A lot of companies are looking at diversifying away from China. So India is one of the potential beneficiaries of the investment. So I agree that India can be a beneficiary of these financial flows.
Sure. So Kaushalendra is asking about politics and economics, little bit of overflow of the both. Between India and China have remained unaffected. How do you see playing it on the midterm? Yeah,
good to hear from Kaushal. He's an old friend. Yeah, by the way, India-China relationship is one of the most dynamic relationship of the 21st century. India-China trade was barely $1 or $2 billion back in 2001. And today it is close to 100 billion. So it's an increase of almost 40 times in the last 20 years. However, this is a strange relationship because the trade is asymmetric, obviously. Also, I believe that the amount of trade deficit that India has can be fulfilled by flow from China into India on capital side. China sits on something like $3 trillion of foreign exchange. If it is mostly exposed to US Treasury bonds or European bonds. Imagine just 1% of their 1 or 1.5% of their capital if it comes into India in sectors like infrastructure. So that can completely nullify the bilateral trade deficit. One more thing, of course, apart from Chinese companies trying to move out of China or at least develop an alternate destination, China has announced an import expo, the first country and historically the first import expo. This will be the third year. This year in November, every year in November, they have an import expo. They have pledged to import something like $15 trillion worth of goods and services. 15 or 10 trillion. Why can't Indian SMEs participate in that? I mean, if you can't go physically to Shanghai or Beijing, try to do it digitally. But China is a $6 trillion consumer market, even at zero growth. Indian SMEs should try and tap into that.
So Mudit Jain has a very revolutionary idea. He's saying that it's better for government to abolish taxes, direct and indirect. Just a quick response.
Sure. In a year when most companies are likely to make losses, any tax relief or tax incentive is not going to work. In fact, the offer the government made from 30% to 25% did not work because most large corporates have MAT tied up, minimum alternate tax credits, which are deferred taxes worth 75,000 crores. So not too many companies migrated to the lower tax regime. So tax relief as a long-term reform is great. But this year, anything on tax incentives is not like you need direct fiscal injection.
So do you think government has resources to announce fiscal stimulus packages?
No, it's not a question of government of resources. I told you, government is sovereign. Sovereign has unlimited access to printing money. The only downside to printing money, I told you, those four things: fear of inflation, fear of crowding out, fear of country rating, and fear of currency. All these four fears, according to me, are benign. I'm not denying, but I'm saying this is benign. Those risks are benign.
So what is your, there's a question which came on WhatsApp to me separately. That's why I was looking at it. Milan now, you're saying, what should the government tell the banks? Because public sector banks, they're in a position to push them to help MSME. In short, what should they tell?
Excellent question. India has 63 million MSMEs. They are the ones who get tightly squeezed. As I said, either they get delayed payments or they don't get the payments, and their whole working capital is often hand to mouth. The small and medium entrepreneurs, they basically pay for their inputs, pay for salaries, sell their goods and services, and wait for the payment to come. If that payment is delayed, then they are screwed. I mean, they just really. So the first thing that needs to be done is to address their working capital needs. I would say that Government of India should announce a blanket across all sectors scheme of providing working capital to SMEs, so long as they are in standard, meaning they are not MPAs, and it should be there should be a cap of, let's say, 1 or 2 or 5 crores, and it should be given across all sectors. And banks should be told. I mean, the banks, by the way, have been told by the RBI. There's something called the targeted LTRO, targeted long-term repo operations, which is supposed to give funding to SMEs. The other thing is digital innovation. Start lending to SMEs based on their GST data. GST, use smart techniques to not have loan based only on working capital. I mean, on receivables or on tangible, collateral, but also things like GST and data. So I agree that the government, and I would say, by the way, one more fiscal worth considering fiscal stimulus is a across the board cut in GST. When Mudit asked about the income tax, across the board cut in GST down to 12%, everything, just 2 rates, 5 and 12.
Okay, so that's probably half good news for Mudit. Give a quick response to this. I want the last 2 questions. Your opinion on UBI, Universal Basic Income, is it the right time for Universal Basic Income?
This has been discussed by the Economic Survey since at least 4 or 5 years, I think. And yeah, I think, the fact is we'll have to try out something like that. But, in the middle of this pandemic right now, I would say the immediate priority, urgent priority right now is food security. A large number of people simply don't have the food grain reaching the last mile of the PDS shops. And incidentally, some 10 to 20 crore people are don't even have a ration card. And the urban migrants don't even have, even if you give them food grain, they don't have cooking facilities. They depend on public eating places, public community kitchens. So you actually have to deliver ready-made cooked food. So that's why the importance of midday meal schemes, which is actually for school children, but expand that, or Amma canteens and so on.
So food security. I'll take this last question and then I have the prerogative of asking one last question. Your call on salary payments by corporation. Government is giving some notifications of pay temporary workers? What is your view on that?
I think,
it good, bad?
the PM made that appeal, but I think it's a bit unfair because it's not purely, moral appeal is one thing, but ultimately you have to pay salaries, real cash, right? And if the companies have zero revenues, for example, many of the companies selling garments, ready-made garments, and malls are shut, so they have zero revenue. Now they can sustain for 1 month or maybe 2 months. How are you going to continue to pay fixed salaries or fixed costs or even mall rentals? So we should follow the example of some of the West European countries or even America. The government is providing support to companies not to retrench workers. So you have to find a way to reimburse the employee cost of, if the government is serious about not allowing corporates or urging corporates not to fire workers, not to lay off workers, not to retrench, then at least reimburse 70 to 80% of the salary. Now it's very easy to do because now we have PF data, we have EPFO, so it can be done. So you need proof from the corporates that you paid salaries and you reimburse. But I don't think it's fair to ask them to keep on, beyond a certain point, they just won't have the resources to support on their own.
So, let me ask you a last question, a little bit personal. I noticed that you're IIT Bombay engineer, then IIM Ahmedabad, and then Brown University and economics. Are you an accidental economist?
Well, I'm just a student of economics, so try not to give a politically correct answer. But economics is everybody's domain, incidentally. The domain is so wide that on one hand it looks like sociology, political science, and demography. On the other extreme, it looks like statistics and applied math. It's really a very wide range. So you can take your pick where you want to, go deeper. So because of my engineering background, I was able to do some math part of it. But I think in India, it's such an exciting place. You get involved in so many aspects of development, monetary policy, fiscal policy. It's great fun.
Good. I'm so glad you chose economics and you're here today. So to get to share your views. Thank you, Ajit. We are a little bit over 20 minutes, and that was very concise. You spoke about COVID bonds, you spoke about UBI, you spoke about fiscal stimulus, GST rates. I think you covered a lot of ground. I'm sure our viewers really enjoyed this 20 minutes with Ajit. What next? So keep the conversation going, and whoever's joined in every Thursday, 5 p.m., we'll be having this 20 minutes live. This is the inaugural session. So we are so happy Ajit was there for the inaugural session. Thank you, Ajit, for joining. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much.